Alright, for this lecture we are looking at nonverbal communication. I enjoy this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson here, and it states that what you do speaks so loud that I cannot hear what you say. It's quite an insightful quote. It shows that the way we say something or the visuals accompanied with what we say often overpower what we hear word-wise, language-wise, as we spoke about last week. It is a very, very detail-oriented and quite impactful form of communication, this nonverbal communication. Now take a look at this pie graph here. Now many believe that verbal communication is the area of communication that we use the most. It's most commonly used, the most detail, the most volume. The belief is that we relay our ideas, opinions, values, perceptions, and personalities through what we say verbally. Reality, however, says something different. Now, according to the graphic that you're seeing here, this pie chart, 65% of all communication is actually nonverbal, meaning 65% of the message received is received through the nonverbal details. So your body posture, your eye contact, your tone of voice, all of those things, and we'll speak about those in a minute, but those are what we interpret 65% of the time, whereas only 35% of the time do we actually hear or focus in on or determine our meaning based on the words said, the content of the message. So actually, really in reality, this 65-30 percentage here is on the lower end of the spectrum, a pretty common average that you see in statistics through studies of people who are interpreting messages, and what message they get out of a communication instance is actually more in the range of 70-80% that is interpreted through nonverbals, and the other 30-20% is done through the verbals. Now these are pretty average studies. These are pretty common. But there are even studies that have shown that the nonverbal is 93% of a message, depending upon the circumstance. Now, consider this as a statistical study or statistical studies of face-to-face communication. Now put the same ideas into things like phone conversations or video messages or texting or emailing, and it seems like, well, there's no nonverbals with emails. There's no nonverbals with a text. Yes, there is. And I've actually posted a kind of a musing and a link to a podcast, and you can either listen to the podcast or read the transcripts, much like you do these lectures, and check how this nonverbal through digital communication can be quite impactful. It is a very interesting subject, and it's a very brief podcast, so take a minute and look at that. It should be in the discussion board. Now, all of this, like I said, is typically studies of face-to-face communication in any typical communication instance. Now, consider when you're communicating about an emotion or with an emotion. And when I say an emotion, I mean a heavier or more extreme emotion, such as anger or sadness or excitement or joy, that kind of thing. That emotion, when we are speaking with that emotion or we are referring to an emotion we're feeling, oftentimes that's where we get that 90% of information is captured or interpreted based on the nonverbals that we display. I mean, how often have you had a conversation with someone and they obviously look mad? You ask them how they are and they say, I'm fine. Really, are they fine? Their tone of voice, their facial expressions, their body posture, all of those things tell you the exact opposite of those words, I'm fine. So the I'm fine is really only about 7% of the message, while 93% of it is all those body language and tone values that help you to interpret what that person is actually feeling. So yes, it does come typically to be, a large impact on the communication that we have. So can this actually be true? Do we actually send out more messages pretty universally across communication? Do we send out more messages with our nonverbal than with what we say verbally? And what is nonverbal communication anyway? So let's quickly take an at-a-glance look and see what kinds of examples we can use to answer these questions. Now, according to Adler and Proctor, nonverbal communication is defined as follows: messages expressed by non-linguistic means. And that's it. That leaves the categories to be quite open, because they are literally just messages expressed by non-linguistic, non-language-based means. So when we say nonverbal communication, we literally mean anything, and I mean anything, other than the words themselves. So here are a couple of the most common areas of nonverbal communication. We have physical appearance and artifacts. The colors that you wear, the way you adorn your room or decorate your home, the types of clothing that you wear. Do you tend to wear dark colors or tight-fitting clothing? Do you like to wear comfy clothes versus professional attire? What kind of message do you send based on your physical appearance? Are you always clean and put together, or are you typically kind of a relaxed look? What is that determines visually, physically, what personality traits you may have or what communication you're trying to send across? As, for example, you may go into a job interview wearing a suit and a tie or dressed professionally in a similar manner. You are communicating that you care about that job, that you are valuing it in some way. If you, on the opposite end, came in with sweatpants and a hoodie, it would come across that you don't care. So our physical appearance, our artifacts, the things that we have display information about us. Next is body posture, body movement, or body orientation. Now, this is how you move, how you stand or sit, and where you're facing. Oftentimes I use the example of if somebody is upset with you, if they're facing you head on, that tells you something. It says they are ready for this confrontation and they are going to be, they're going to be forthright with their feelings and ideas. Now, if they orient themselves in a different way, maybe turn their back to you or lean to the side or put their head down, that's going to tell you something else, that maybe they're not quite ready for this confrontation, or they want to get away, so they're orienting their body in a direction that can hopefully lead them to get out. So body movement, your gestures, your posture, if you are, say, leaning forward during a conversation, that shows that you are engaged in the conversation. Whereas if you're leaning back with your arms crossed, maybe it shows that you are very confident and potentially even cocky about the conversation. So body movement, posture, and orientation do impact things. Gestures are another part of nonverbal communication. We can use gestures in a number of ways. We can use them to emphasize what we're trying to say, to send the message home. And we can also use them in replacement of a message. So I might use a gesture when you can't hear words that I'm speaking. So I might use a gesture to send you a message to replace what would have been sent verbally. Or the more I gesture, maybe the more emotion you can interpret from my message. I often get very bold with my gestures when I'm lecturing in class, and the reason for that is because I'm excited or enthusiastic about my topic. So I tend to be a little bit more big and, quote, loud with my gestures when I'm excited about something. So those can add to the message as well. Now, facial expressions are another one, and facial expressions can be very telling. And one of the reasons I think these are so telling is because we obviously cannot see our own face unless we're staring in a mirror, right? So sometimes we don't even realize that we're relaying messages via our facial expressions because we can't see what we're doing. I can see what my hands are doing. I can look at my posture. I can look at my body orientation and easily see what I'm doing. And so I may be a little bit more conscious of those things. Not always, but in many cases I can be conscious of what I'm doing with those nonverbals. Facial expressions is a little bit more difficult. I'm not always as conscious about what I'm doing with those. So using using squinting with your eyes, or a slight smile, those can say something about the message that is being received or is being projected out. Another one is eye contact or eye movement. And this and touch are important because they're impactful, but also important because they differ based on the culture that you're in. And remember, we said culture can be a number of things. It's not just regionally based. It could be family style. So maybe your family tends to be the kind of group, the kind of people that make direct eye contact and hug a lot. That might be different from a friend of yours whose family doesn't make direct eye contact and are not touchy. Those relay specific messages. Now, when we look at community or the American culture as a whole, this is important because if you say travel overseas for business, there are going to be instances where that culture typically adheres to specific rules with eye contact and touch. You know, in the American culture, what you will often see when greeted in a business meeting is a firm handshake, right? That's pretty traditional. Eye contact and a firm handshake. In another culture, it may be no eye contact and bowing, or it may be the grabbing of a person's shoulder, making eye contact, and then kissing each cheek. So it's very, very important not to remain ethnocentric and be without a desire, indifferent, as we spoke about last lecture, without a desire to understand that other culture, and then go into it in a business situation and make a big mistake by doing certain nonverbals that you shouldn't do. So eye movement, touch, those can relay relationship types, they can relay respect, they can give a little bit more detail about the content of a message. All of those things are factors. The next one on here is voice or paralanguage. I think this one is very interesting because we often don't think of these as nonverbal because they make sounds. They are part of the language, part of the words. So it is how you say a message rather than the message itself. I mean, really, what is sarcasm but paralanguage, but the nonverbals? If I were to say to this class that I love this class, that would come across very clearly. I actually enjoy this class. You guys are wonderful. But if I were to turn that around and use my tone, maybe emphasize a word a little bit differently, or change the inflection in my pitch to say something like, I love this class, well, that's going to be quite a different message. So your voice, the paralanguage, the ways in which you use rate, pitch, volume, emphasis, all of these things, those can be very impactful in the overall meaning of a message. Now the next one here is time. And time is an interesting one. If you are a person similar to myself, you take time very, very seriously and literally. So if something says to be there at 7 o'clock, you arrive on or before that instant, that 7 o'clock spot. Some people don't take time as literally or as heavily. They are a little bit more lax with time and take it a little bit more figuratively. 7 o'clock means somewhere in between 6 and 8. So you don't really have this literal and hard interpretation of time. That sends messages as well. Imagine how it might come across if you have someone in a relationship that takes time literally and someone that does not. If, for example, you are married to someone who does not take time very literally and you do, you have a hard time trying to get out the door to go places. And what are you thinking? When that person takes forever to go to an event at your family's house, you might consider them as disrespecting your family, or they don't care about how you feel, all of those things. Whereas that person probably doesn't think those things. They probably don't feel that way. It's just how they see time. Vice versa, if that person is more laid back and the other person is always trying to get them out the door to go to a certain thing or be at a certain place at a certain time, you might see them as uptight or anal retentive or whatever other language you want to use. So time can play a part. And then finally we have space here. And this means literally how you use distance or how you use the physical space that you're occupying. So in this case, you might think of a meeting with a boss. How does that boss use the space in his or her office? What kind of tables do they have in there? Where are the chairs arranged? Where does your boss sit? Does your boss, when they invite you into a meeting, do they come around their desk to greet you, or do they stay behind their desk? All of that sends a message, whether intentional or not, that it could go either way. But the use of our space sends a message. How do you orient your living room at home? I know my living room, I've got one of those movie theater couches in a semi-U shape, and it is faced right at the TV. And that tells you something about our family. We enjoy movies and family time circled around that activity. So your use of space can play a major role. I mean, think about that wonderful mythological being of the Knights of the Round Table. The round table is kind of this whole idea of using space to create connection. So that is something that can impact how a message is received. Now you see how some of the most common areas of nonverbal communication that we think about are impacting our everyday communication instances. How much information are you giving away with your nonverbals? I mean, you have to really think about it. How much detail are you providing in an instance, even if you're not speaking? How much information are you giving away with just your nonverbals alone? What clothes are you wearing? What are you doing with your hands? Are you maintaining or are you avoiding eye contact with someone, and why? What is your tone of voice saying about the message you're verbalizing? Are you mumbling with your head down? Are you emphasizing certain words? Are you loud? Are you quiet? Are you high-pitched? Are you low-pitched? What? These things can impact the type of message that you're sending. So these are really just some of the questions that you can ask to assess how much information you are relaying with those nonverbals. So going back to the question we asked earlier, can this be true? Do we actually send out more messages with our nonverbal than with what we say verbally? Absolutely. Verbal communication is only words. Look how much is included in nonverbal communication. I mean, you saw the list, and I barely touched on some of those categories. So is there a reason to study nonverbal communication? Oh yeah. Nonverbal skills are vital. They can make you more persuasive. I mean, think about the times you've been persuaded by someone in an argument or in a formal setting. Many times it's the information, but more often than not, it is how the information is relayed. The organization of the material, the tone of the speaker's voice, the passion in their language and in their tone and their pitch and their volume, all of those things can lead to being more persuasive. I mean, they skill you in this, in persuasive speaking. I know, I teach it. Are they more emotionally, that they'll allow you to be more emotionally intelligent? You're able to read people more clearly if you study nonverbals. And they're able to alter your perceived status in terms of how popular you are, how attractive you are, or your socio-emotional well-being. So if you know how to manage your own nonverbals, you can impact how people see you and how they view your status, your popularity, or your attractiveness. Oftentimes you hear the saying that someone is seen as more attractive because they're more confident. Well, that confidence is relayed through the nonverbals. So think about those things. They can be a very big part of life in your personal life and your professional career. Now, one other thing developing skills in this area of nonverbal communication can do is to help you, quote, hear it all, even the lies. Have you ever wondered if there are signals, specifics to watch out for to detect whether someone is lying or not? There actually are studies and even courses and full-time practitioners in this field of nonverbal lie detection. Now, if you look at the trailer of this series, I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but Lie to Me is a slightly older series, but very fascinating. And especially the first few episodes of this series really give fantastic information. It is very truly studied. It's very accurate in many cases. It's absolutely studied, and it is something that people are trained in to try and catch those lies that are being relayed. Now, it's not one of those non-falsifiable, absolutely concrete pieces of evidence, but they definitely can lead you down the right path to changing questions that are asked and adjusting your perception of things. Take a minute and watch the promo. It's a very interesting promo for this show, and if you get a chance to watch the first episode, I'm not sure if it's on Netflix, but I know for sure that it's on Amazon, and you can get the first episode for like 99 cents or something. Or in some cases, it's even free. It just depends on how you go about it. Take a look at it. See what you think. Whether or not you wish to be able to detect lying, nonverbal skills are a must. If you watch someone closely, you can tell quite a lot just from their body language, their eye contact, their gestures, their facial expression, and their use of space, just to name a few. Hopefully this was impactful and enlightening for you. Nonverbal communication is something that you could take an entire class on. As a matter of fact, at SWIC there is a class on nonverbal communication, and it's something to be explored. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next lecture.